All right, let me hit record and we can start. Um, just keep that open, probably. All right, guys, this is a weird week. Um, yeah, so hopefully y'all are recovering from being brain drained by that PSAT yesterday. I know if I took a 3-hour test, that would just wipe me out. But we're gonna get notes for chapter 19, which is our last chapter. For what that's worth, it's kind of exciting. I will be able to show y'all some of 20. I'll introduce the fourth declension, and 20 is a nice, good, even number. So it'll officially be 20, but we're not going to really have time to hang out with 20. But so we'll introduce 19 today. I'll stream tomorrow, same time, do a little bit of practice, and then you guys will take a vocab quiz on Friday. I'm realizing that it is a horrible idea to introduce a new chapter on a Wednesday after a 3-day weekend when I couldn't stream on Tuesday. Anyway, people have not been coming to my streams today, less than normal. And so I'm just I'm going to have to reteach all these chapters again on Monday. But whatever, I might do that. I don't know. And you guys will just know it extra well. But I will upload it, so maybe people will check it out on YouTube and it'll be fine. But that'll be a vocab quiz. Those vocab words are on page. It'll probably be 155, 156 or something like that. But it's chapter 19. So hopefully you know how your textbook works at this point. As for the test last week, it went pretty good. Passive voice takes some getting used to, so it didn't seem too bad. Blind fortune rules their minds, the minds of those who are taught. Dokentor was present passive. At least some people were able to tell us, just go present passive with care, or not taught with care, rather. Yeah, so its voice was passive, its tense was present. It is third plural, but I didn't ask about that. What else? I asked one other thing, and now I can't think of it. Oh, quiz antecedent, maybe not, because that's more of a chapter 17 thing. But its antecedent was aorm. I don't think I did ask that. The minds of all listeners were moved. Were is important because it's imperfect passive. And I think y'all mostly seem to do really well. And some people didn't quite know this was present. I think I made a big deal about most of the verbs being imperfect last week, but this one was actually present. This one, though, was imperfect, and that went really well for most people. And these were all somehow weirdly genitive endings here. And tertia satura was an ablative of means because it has no preposition, but we translate it with by because the verb was passive. And then I wrote this sentence. I think a couple people got it. I know they don't want to be singled out, but I think Brandy got it, maybe Josie. Anyway, a couple people. So the evil or the bad teacher is not praised by the students. Okay, some people I think kind of got the subject mixed up with what we call the ablative of agent. The ablative of agent, just like an ablative of means with a passive verb, is translated with by. But when it's a person, that's the only difference, is that it's a person and not a thing. That's why I say agent, not means. Agent meaning a doer of something. Agent, if you translate it in terms of what it means in Latin, it just means doer. Now we think of secret agent or an actor's agent. But anyway, it will have the preposition a or ob, so that helps. But we don't translate a or ob as from there. We translate it as by. And yeah, this was just present passive. But some people got student, the ablative agent, mixed up with the subject, so they were the students are not praised by the evil teacher, which I guess that kind of makes sense. I can almost see why that would happen. But that would be mollis discipulus ob magistro. It would need to be ablative, non-loud ontor. Anyway, not bad. All right, notes for chapter 19, but let me build up to it. Relevant to this chapter is this fun verb, sum esse fui futorum. It just means to be. It's really weird in that it switches from starting with S to starting with E, but it still kind of has an MST mustus kind of thing going. Not kind of, it just does. And then in English, we translate to be differently depending on what subject it has. It has, unfortunately, different looking imperfect and future versions. Eram, eras, erat. You can kind of, once you look at the first person singular version, you can kind of figure out the other ones. Future versions use I. Anyway, I'm just saying this because sum esse is a part of something this chapter. It's not you'll see. But there's that. And then there's newly the weird future tense versions of sum essa that draw from this very different looking third principal part. So fui is like I was, which is basically the same as the imperfect version, right? Or it could be I have been, fuist you were or have been, fuit it was, etc. Just want to throw that out there. And one other thing I want to review before I get into the new stuff is that keep in mind that verbs dictionary entries include 4 principal parts. It's a kind of unfortunately long-winded word for the 4 forms of the verb that you see every time you look at a dictionary entry. It's like Latin verbs are kind of so, it's not that they're so weird. It's like English should probably do this too, honestly. It's just our rules are less set in stone, so I don't think it would work. But it's almost like a map key is how I've described this before. Like it tells you how to kind of like handle this verb. It communicates what the conjugation of a verb is. It shows you what the perfect stem of the verb is to form all the 3 perfect tense versions of the verb. And so, yeah, if we walk through it, the first principal part is a first person singular present tense form. It's the I verb or am verbing form of the verb. I could say it also has indicative mood and active voice, but I don't really need to say that. It's just complicating things. The second principal part is the infinitive. By the way, I'm just putting 4 here to show you like this is a first conjugation verb, second, third, fourth. Generally, they all have 4 principal parts. So there are some verbs that only have 3, but that's kind of rare. Anyway, moneo moneira, the infinitive is the unconjugated version. It's the to verb version, not the I verb or you verb or whatever that you form from the infinitives, but the unconjugated. So to love, to warn, to capture, to come. And then the third principal part is the first person singular perfect indicative active version of the verb. So as the first person singular is like I verb or am verbing, the third principal part is I verbed or have verbed. I did something in the past. It is a complete action. And so as we can see, it's like sometimes a consonant kind of appears that wasn't there before to make it a perfect stem. Okay, that happens with this V or this U. I guess U is not quite a consonant for English, but sometimes like a vowel shifts. I feel like we have a lot of ones that they go from like the A will turn into an E or something. And sometimes not much happens at all, except something that is almost completely unnoticeable, like Waney having a long E, where Vinio is not a long E. So that's kind of weird. But then now this fourth principal part, what is that? That is what chapter 19 kind of introduces. And so it's like a fitting place for us to end. Now we know how to use all 4 parts of the gosh dang Latin verbs that we've been wrestling with for this past year. But this is also kind of relevant to chapter 18. In chapter 18, we got the passive voice, okay, where instead of OST must assent, I actively verb, you actively verb. We have I am verbed passively, a verb happening to the I. You are verb, it is verb, etc. For better for worse, we didn't just get present passive, we got imperfect passive and future passive as well. And that just kind of affects the helping verbs that you use to translate said verbs, whether it be was or were, with the imperfect passive that have the BA in there, or will and be that we use to translate the future passive. But now in chapter 19, we're going to get the perfect passive system. So this will allow us to have verbs with the passive voice, but in the perfect, pluperfect, or future perfect tense. So how does this work exactly? Well, like I said, you use the fourth principal part of a verb. And usually, whereas like sometimes the third principal part of a verb doesn't look like it looks kind of like the first 2 principal parts, but it's sort of different. None of these are really good examples. Like Kepi, sort of. Like you might look at Kepi and not realize that it's related to Copy Copy. Luckily, though, fourth principal parts usually look a lot like the first 2 principal parts. So you can usually recognize what verb it is pretty easily, more easily than if it was just a perfect active verb. And so you take that, and then you add it to a form of sum essa. And the ending of the fourth principal part of the verb, I kind of want to refer to as supine because that's a technical term, but that might just be confusing to people. Let's see. I'll just call it the fourth principal part, even though it's a mouthful. It's going to end in a way that agrees with its subject. So if it's like a man has been praised, but well, we would use US at the end. If it's a woman, it's A, etc. Whereas the sum essa communicates the person and number that is involved. So laudatus sum is this perfect passive verb that would mean, it would translate to I was praised or have been praised. And you might be thinking, that sounds like the imperfect passive, okay, which you'd be right. You'd be right. But we already knew that perfect active and imperfect active verbs sort of overlapped and that they could both be just translated as verbed. So it's the same kind of thing here. And then, yeah, you just go from there. Since the second person version of sum essa is S, laudatus est is you were praised or have been praised. Laudatus est would be third person, so it might have a subject like Cicero or the sailor or whatever. But if it didn't, it would be a drop subject. You'd use he or she. Was or has been praised, and so on and so forth. You can see in the plurals, instead of having a US, A, or UM option, for like which are the various singular nominatives of singular endings in the first and second declension, you would have to have plural ones because these are going to be plural. And so laudati sumus would be like we are praised. And you'd use a long I if the we was masculine, if it was only dudes. If it was a group of women, laudatai sumus. So again, it's like the fourth principal part will reflect or agree rather with the case number and gender of the subject, whereas the sum essa part of it is going to agree in person and number. And so it's just one verb, but it's going to look like it's in two chunks, and that's what's kind of weird and new about this chapter, is that these verbs are going to appear like they're in two different parts. But when you see puella laudata est in the context of this chapter, especially since you should be expecting it, understand that to be just one verb. And, it's really not that different than like laudator, which is the present passive, or rather laudator, the imperfect passive. So puella laudata est would be this perfect passive, and the subject is puella. Est is third singular, so it agrees with puella, who is a she. And because she's a she, laudata gets the A ending. And just a reminder, like if you're wondering where is laudata coming from, again, that is lauda, laudare, laudavi. It's coming from laudatus. Usually, it depends on the dictionary, but some dictionaries will like type out all three genders and like from the nominative, but usually they just by default put it in the neuter. And so yeah, we like basically we took that fourth principal part, and then we made it agree with the girl, so it's ending in an A, and then we added a form of sum essa that was appropriate, in this case est, and that would just translate to the girl was praised or has been praised. That was perfect passive. It has to be in the past. It's still passive in that the verb is happening to the subject, but now it's you can use has been as your helping verbs. We couldn't really use has been to translate the imperfect passive, which you see right here. But we could use was, okay? So puella laudabatur, that's something we should have learned how to do back in chapter 18. And that would also be the girl was praised. I guess specifically it could be a little different in that it could be the girl was being praised, but you don't have to use that being helping verb. So in a lot of ways, perfect passive is a little weird. I like getting into chapter 23 because it's like a totally different kind of thing. But this is almost just like a little footnote on the end of learning the passive voice. It almost feels more complicated to identify these compared to the present imperfect and future passive, but they translate similarly. They're just formed kind of weirdly. So puella laudabatur, the girl was praised. And it's not just going to be the perfect passive for better or for worse. We also can have pluperfect or future perfect passive. And so if your form of sum essa is in the present, that's just perfect passive. But if it's an imperfect form, that's going to be the pluperfect. So this would not be the girl was being praised, but the girl had been praised. Oh, okay. I guess I'm showing that to y'all here. Yeah. Okay, so like Irama Rasa Rach, you might not remember these necessarily, but these are the imperfect forms of sum essa. By themselves, normally they mean I was, you were, it was, we were, etc. But when used in tandem with this new fourth principal part that we're using for the first time, that will be the equivalent of a pluperfect passive. So I have a chart for this in the classroom. You guys will be able to look at that again on Monday. It might make a little more sense or seem less intimidating then. Because, I mean, there is this kind of weird thing where, like, so imperfect forms of sum essa are used for the pluperfect passive, but future forms of sum essa are used for the future perfect passive. And I think that is kind of confusing. But basically, if you do see a imperfect version of sum essa with your pluperfect passive verb, it's pluperfect for one thing. And then you got to use had, right? We use the helping verb had because we want to express that this is happening as far back in time as we could possibly express with language. And then if you use future tense versions of sum essa, it'll be future perfect passive. And this is super rare. It doesn't happen. And when it does happen, you have to bust out a whopping 3 helping verbs to translate it. Though it's kind of nice, it is the same 3 helping verbs over and over again. But that just demonstrates how English and Latin are these totally different flavors of language, where Latin just uses different forms and endings to express differences in tense, mood, voice, etc., the different characteristics a verb can have. English is all about using helping verbs to the point of sometimes having to stack 3 helping verbs to translate something. And so back to this example, Puella laudate erat would be pluperfect passive, and we would just translate it as the girl had been praised, as opposed to has, because had is happening further back in time. I don't know why. It's like almost fitting in. It fits when I go full screen, sort of, and then not when I'm. Oh wait, I can zoom. Yeah. Oh, okay. Literae scriptae erunt. Scriptae here is from Scribo Scribera Scripsi Scriptum, which I could have swore I had out. Did I put that somewhere else? Huh. Thought whatever. I thought I like tidied up the slide a little bit, but that would be, since erunt is the future version of sum essa, that would be the letters will have been written. Okay, here we go. This is kind of what I was picturing. So just regular perfect passive, we use the present form of sum essa with the fourth principal part of scribo, which let me actually show you that. That's what I'm wanting to see here. Scribo, scribera, scripsi, scriptum is to write, right? So we're just grabbing that fourth principal part. We're making the ending agree with literae, so it gets the AE ending because literae luckily is first conjugation, and these can take on first or second declension endings. And then erunt will agree in person and number with letters, so it's plural, it's third person, the letters are they. But whereas sunt is present normally, and in this context will create a perfect passive situation, scriptae. Erunt is the imperfect version of sum essa, and in this context will create a pluperfect passive. Whereas erunt, the normally future tense version of sunt, sum essa, will be, in this context, part of a future passive, future perfect passive verb. So yeah, as you can see, this chapter is very involved, and I will absolutely have to teach it again on Monday. That's okay. Let's see, some participles to look out for. Because like I said, most fourth principal parts are pretty close to their first 2, or hopefully they're very recognizable. So if you look at scriptum, or if you saw scripti, or scripti, or it could have any ending technically. So the last 2 letters are not really important. But hopefully you'd be like, okay, that looks like a verb. Like that reminds me of scribo, scribera. Unfortunately, you might reasonably get mixed up with scriptor, scriptoris. Actually, I don't think I have that word yet. There's a noun that you'll eventually get this mixed up with. Maybe not yet. But yeah, so hopefully that you'll have that light bulb moment of being like, okay, this is coming from a verb, but it's looking almost like not a verb. It has a noun or adjective style ending, right? We've never really had verbs end in AE, or at least some of the endings they might get here. And then you see it next to a sum essa, you should think this is one of these new weird perfect passive verbs. And depending on what tense the sum essa is, that'll affect what tense your passive verb is, whether it's perfect, pluperfect, or future perfect passive. But anyway, what I was actually saying is, yeah, this fourth principal part, you can hopefully recognize that it's related to scribo, scribro. I mean, it's a little weird in that it already has the P that shows up in the third principal part, so that's one reason you might get it mixed up. But for the most part, a lot of verbs, it's very easy to tell what their fourth principal part is, or vice versa. To look at a fourth principal part and know what verb it's coming from. Like, I don't think you look at laudatus and not know that it's coming from laudo, laudare. But yeah, so like, but some of them do have weird ones. Video, videra, for instance, to see has a visus sum, or a visus rather, and I'm making it a perfect passive verb here by adding sum. And so that doesn't look much like it. We get words like visual from that. And a lot of these wouldn't even really show up necessarily, but I'll just go through them. Euvo, to help. Eutis is kind of different looking. Sumessa gets futurus. That's not going to come. Don't worry about it. Audeo turns into alsis. A little different. The D goes away entirely. Ago agra turns into octus, but maybe that's not bad because we should think of ago agra as often meaning to act, sometimes to do. Gero, gera, gessi, gestus. This is one where it looks more like the third principal part, which is kind of rare. Tractus is quite different than any of its third principal parts, but that's the part I remember because I think of a tractor pulling something. It means to pull. Gera means to wage, by the way. Vivo, that won't show up, so it doesn't really matter. Mitra, mitra, misi, misus. So misus is a little different. Again, it almost looks like the third principal part, but it's like a double S, which is kind of weird. Kado, kadara, kikiri, kasora. So not only does this have a wild third principal part for its perfect first person singular form, but kasuris is really, it won't show up though, don't worry. So stare, steady, status. We get the word status from this, and it kind of looks like the second principal part, but it's a little different. But yeah, so the ones with the question marks especially, that's me indicating that it won't even show up. But like vis assume, what would that mean if it did? It would mean I have been seen, okay? Because it's passive and it's perfect. So I want to use have to communicate that it's perfect tense. And then been plus like the verb form of the verb is going to help us connect well, essentially as like a past tense version of the verb with the helping verb have. You to assume I have been helped. I was helped would be the same thing technically. I was seen. I have been dared. Like what? Anyway, sumessa means to be. So I have been existed. That wouldn't even really happen. I have like ago agra usually do or act, but it can be spend or something. I have been done. Maybe I don't think that would show up. Guess assume I have been waged, I have been managed. I guess there could be a context where that's appropriate. So on and so forth, and some of these just wouldn't occur. But that is the gist of the chapter. So we'll be looking for sentences that have a word that reminds us of a verb but doesn't look that verby. It actually looks more adjective-y, like all of these right here. They don't have to end in US, it can be A or UM or whatever it needs to be. And then we'll be seeing a form of sum essa. And you'll know it's passive. You'll probably know it's either perfect, you'll hopefully know it's either perfect, pluperfect, or future perfect. But you have to kind of analyze what tense your sum essa form is to understand if it's perfect, pluperfect, or future perfect. This will make way more sense once we apply it to a few examples I have that we'll do in like 5 minutes or less. There are maybe it's like 1.5 other little things this chapter, but they're not bad. Called an interrogative pronoun, but don't freak out. As you can see, this is basically just qui, qui, quod. Okay, the plural forms are identical to our relative pronoun, but we technically get this it's like kind of new quis, and these are used differently. These won't be used in the same way as relative pronouns, where it's like I met the person who is now the subject of my relative clause. It won't be that. These are for asking questions. So hopefully that's something interrogative makes you think of anyway, asking questions. Whereas quis will usually be a who kind of thing, quid would be more of a what, so it is neuter. And so that kind of indicates that would be going with a word like what. That doesn't indicate a person necessarily. But yeah, these are just asked to use actual questions like, what is it? Who are you? Whose house are we going to, or something like that. And then like a brother of the interrogative pronouns, interrogative adjective. Last thing I promise, these interrogative adjectives are kind of like qui, qui, quod in that they are used for asking questions, but they're used slightly differently in that they're used to ask about another specific noun in the sentence. So quim librum legis would be, which book are you reading? Okay, it's not just like, what are you reading? Because what are you reading would be something like, it'd be like let's go back to the interrogative pronoun thing. And not quis, that's more like who, but like quid, which is what are you reading, which would just be leges. We get Lego Legra recently, just to read. What are you reading? So it's like a more open-ended question. So interrogative pronouns are more open-ended questions, like what are you reading? Who is teaching the class? Whereas interrogative adjectives are asking about something specifically, like which book are you reading? So an example of an interrogative pronoun would be quis librum legit. And that's just who reads the book. Who reads the book? Okay, we're using quis because that is the singular masculine feminine version of this new interrogative pronoun. New with an asterisk because it's not really new. It's just qui qui quad with like quis thrown in for when you are doing a singular masculine feminine thing. And the subject's actually coming from, well, quis is the subject and legit is its verb. Who reads the book? Because who kind of counts as a he, she, or it. I'm saying kind of when I mean like not kind of. Whereas an interrogative adjective example is the same one you see here. Which book are you reading? And so it's kind of, at least sometimes visually easy to tell that the interrogative word, whether it's an adjective or a pronoun, which is not something I'm going to really have you guys, I'm not going to like ask on a quiz, is this an interrogative pronoun or adjective? Maybe I should, but I just want you to kind of know how these work and not necessarily need to tell me what term you would use. But it'll agree in case, number, and gender with the noun it's asking about. So that means at least in some cases, it'll actually look like the noun it's asking about, which is nice. All right, let's do a little bit of practice and that'll be it for today. Quis librum tibi dedit. We got 3 examples of sentences. One will have an interrogative pronoun, one will have an interrogative adjective, and one I think will have neither, and we'll just use qui qui quad in chapter 17 style, meaning as the antecedent, or I'm sorry, as the relative pronoun of a relative clause. But so this is going to be who. When I see quis with the S, I automatically think who. See something about a book, something about to or for you, and then this is from dodare, to give. So hopefully you should be able to put it together at that point. But this would mean who gave you the book. All right, pretty straightforward. This sentence we don't need to dwell on because it's a chapter 17 style, but it's showing you how qui qui quad can still just be, part of a relative clause and not asking a question. But luckily English has punctuation, so you'll be able to see if there's a question mark at the end of your sentence with qui qui quad in it. And only really when it's the first word, like when it's the first word in the sentence, a qui qui quad or a quis, that'll definitely be a question kind of thing. Whereas it won't be the first word in the context of a sentence with a relative clause. It just might be the first word of the relative clause. No. So that would be like the man who, okay, so it is still translated as who, whether it's quis as an interrogative pronoun or qui, a relative pronoun, who gave to you the book. Okay. What did he do? He praised you. So the main clause is just the man praised you. But then let's look at an interrogative pronoun, or I'm sorry, adjective example, which I already kind of gave you an example, quim librum. That em looks third declension style accusative, and that looks second declension accusative. They do go together, so that's what makes this an interrogative adjective as opposed to an interrogative pronoun. So we're not asking this more open-ended question like, who gave you the book? But more like, really? They must have made the time limit even less. Okay, so this is going to go on for no more than 10, or it just took me way too long to already explain all this. Okay, which book, okay? It's going to be going with librum. So it's not like a who or what kind of thing. I guess it could be what. I guess you could say like, what book has he or she given to you? But that sounds a little weird to me. I'd rather which. So which book has he given to you? Where did my slide go? And so, yeah, the top one is an example of interrogative pronoun. The bottom one is an interrogative adjective. Not terms I will ask you for on a quiz, but terms you should understand and for the sake of you translating well. Let's do a couple more slides of practice. So the qui or the quis or whatever it's going to be, it doesn't have to be nominative or technically accusative, which they are here. If they're something like genitive, which we have here, cuius librum cicero tibi dedit, that'd be whose direct object book. And then after that, I need a helping verb. So I look at my verb dedit and I'm like, okay, it's still perfect tense. So whose book has? We got to make it past tense, like even further back than imperfect. We want to say whose book was Cicero giving to you anyway. It sounds weird. So whose book has the subject Cicero given to you, Tibi? It's an interrogative pronoun because it's more open-ended. Cuius is right next to the direct object of the sentence, so they're not agreeing in case, number, and gender like quem librum was in this bottom example or this middle of the screen example. Whereas the next one, cuius libri, they are actually both genitive. They might not necessarily look like it, but libri is from liber libri, which is a second declension word. So that's a second declension long I. And then cuius, hopefully some of us maybe know as genitive of qui qui quod. So that's like whose book was Cicero the author of. In English, we'd probably use the preposition of there, but maybe you can get away without it, I guess. And then just for the heck of it, they give us another relative clause example. The man whose book Cicero gave to you praised you. Yes. Okay. One of those tricky ones where the relative clause is in the middle of the sentence. What if we're using an interrogative pronoun or adjective that is dative? It would kind of be translated the same way cui is when it's a relative pronoun. So cui amico might not really look like it, but with that long O on the end of amico, it could either be ablative or dative. So cui and amico could both be dative. Cui has to be dative, but amico could. So we should probably assume it is since it's right next to a dative. So that would be like to, and not to whom, comma, the friend. Because before I talked to you guys to translate cui as whom when it was an interrogative, a relative pronoun. But more like to which friend. And then librum dedisti. Dedisti has that crazy second person perfect tense ending. So it's to which friend have perfect tense. Better than a word. Have you, second person, given the book. Whereas the next example is a more open-ended interrogative pronoun. To whom has Cicero given the direct object? So hopefully we kind of see the difference there. It's like when it's an interrogative adjective, it usually seems to be translated as more like which. To which blah, 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 which blah, 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 etc. Where it's an interrogative pronoun, it'll actually be kind of translated a little more like how it is when it's a relative pronoun, which we have an example of at the bottom. We're the man, cui cicero librum, to whom Cicero gave a book, praised you. Didn't I already do that one? Huh? Oh, see, the man whose book Cicero gave to you versus the man to whom Cicero gave the book. Ugh. Very close there. All right, I thought I had more examples than that, but I guess that's fine. I'm going to send you guys a vocab quiz on Friday. Tomorrow, let's do a little bit of practice. Yeah, I'll make it real quick, too, to incentivize you guys to come, since just coming to the stream is a much better option than waiting for the upload and watching it later, like in the evening. Also, isn't it nice the sun's going to come out tomorrow? I'm so tired of this winter weather now that it's almost May. Random. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. I'll send out that quiz on Friday. I'll stream tomorrow. No homework this week for whatever reason. And we'll get back to like normal stuff on Monday in the building. Hopefully, it seems like that'll be fine. But yeah, there'll also be a little quiz on Friday, and that'll be it. So I'll talk to y'all later, and let me know if you have any questions.